What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, as always, we'll get to your thoughts, your comments in the mix later on in the show. Segment 2, we've got some Pll Awards, end of season awards to give out here on the podcast. We'll also get your thoughts on those as well. But to lead off the show, the Atlas are on the verge here this weekend, the final weekend of the regular season. The Atlas are on the verge of 2 number ones, and I'll explain what that means here in just a second. But to recap some of the moves made by the Atlas this offseason, particularly the trades, are what we're going to look at here. First, they traded Rob Pennell to the Redwoods for the 3rd overall pick in the entry draft this year and a 2022 second-round pick in next year's college draft. That entry pick turned into Dan Vaccaro this year. They then traded Paul Rabel to the Cannons for a 2021 entry pick, a first-round college draft pick, and in 2021 and in 2022. That entry pick then turned into Michael Rexroad. The college draft pick that they used this year was on Dox Aiken, and as I said, they'll also have that first rounder next year as well. Then they finished it all out, their 3rd trade of the offseason, sending Ryan Brown to the Water Dogs for the number 11 pick in this year's college draft. That turned in to Danny Logan. So all that is to say, as I mentioned, the Atlas are on the verge of 2 number ones here this weekend in Albany. And what that means is that the Atlas, as I mentioned, because of that Paul Rabel trade, hold the Cannons 2022 first round pick wherever that ends up. As it currently stands, if the Cannons lose to the Chrome here this weekend and miss out on the postseason, they'll almost be guaranteed the number 1 overall pick in 2022. That pick, of course, would go to the Atlas in that case. Meanwhile, the Atlas in this weekend will be playing for the number 1 overall seed in the 2021 postseason. And they already, as we all know, held the number 1 pick here in 2021, drafting Jeff Teat. So in one weekend, the Atlas can lock up first place in the league, the bye week in the first round of the postseason, and the number 1 pick in next year's college draft after having been the last place team the last 2 years in the PLL, and by many accounts going into this season were picked near the bottom of the league again. So in 2022, the Atlas will have 2 first-round picks, potentially one of those, as I said, being that number 1 overall pick, if that is the case, with the Cannons pick, and 2 second-round picks next year as well because of that pick coming from the Redwoods. And so the Atlas should have 5 total picks in next year's college draft because they did send a 2022 4th round pick to the Cannons to acquire midfielder Brent Adams. So at worst, they're going to have 5 picks next year, 2 in the first round, 2 in the second round, and potentially a number 1 pick. And I think worst case scenario around that Cannons pick is that if the Cannons win this weekend, I believe I read somewhere there is a possibility that a win by maybe 4 or 5 goals could push them into that number 6 spot in the rankings and in the postseason. And as such, the Atlas would then end up with probably like a number 3 or number 4 pick overall in that first round next year. And that's also assuming that, given where they are currently in the standings, that they would also then have a late first round pick in addition to that, somewhere probably between 6 to number 8. So worst case scenario here, if you're the Atlas, is you're going to be picking top 3, top 4, and then also have a pick at the back half of the first round as well, and you'll have multiple seconds there as well. So similar to what they had here this past spring with the 2021 college draft. So when we talk about trades like this, we often have to say it's hard to judge these trades in that moment because you have to see how they play out. If the trades involve picks, you have to see what those picks do, who those picks even are when it comes time to make those selections and things like that. And I've had guys like Phil Roth or McJordan Johnson, et cetera, on this show in the past, and we've all said that too, that it's so hard to judge some of these trades in the moment. Even if it's a player for player pick, you still have to see how that player pans out on their new team. But now that we are where we are in this season, it's a lot easier to judge the moves that Ben Rubio made, specifically with the trades that he made and the picks that he acquired and the players that he was able to get using those picks. And all I'll say about those moves and this quote-unquote retooling in particular is that Ben Rubio played this about as perfectly as you could have possibly done in 1 year's time. Now, like I said, he still has those several picks in next year's college draft, and yes, you'd like to see him be able to hit on a few of those next spring as well, so you still have to see how some of those picks shape out. But just looking at the moves he made and the way that those moves impacted this team this year, as I said earlier in the segment, they were preseason picked to go anywhere from, number 6 to number 8, maybe number 5 at best, and now they're sitting number 1, and all they have to do is win on Saturday in order to officially lock up that number 1 seed in the postseason. So what he was able to do with these moves and to turn this team around the way that he has been, like I said, he's basically played this as perfectly as you could have. And I think when you even look at some of those picks that he'll have going into the 2022 college draft, they've shown this year that they're no longer a retooling, a rebooting, whatever you want to call it, rebuilding team. So I don't think Ben Rubio has to be as aggressive next off season as he was this year in assembling this roster and some of the moves that he made. He can actually take some of those picks that he has at his disposal, and he can either A, use them like he did this year and continue building this young core group of guys that can be versatile and do a lot of different things, as we've seen some of them do here this year, or if he feels comfortable with the team that he has going into 2022 and building for the future and still being able to compete here and now in 2021 and 2022 and even into 2023, he could actually move some of those picks, maybe acquire a couple really solid pieces here and there to really fill out this roster and be able to make a play for the 2022 and 2023 championship if that's the way he wants to go about it. But I don't think either way he does it, I don't think either way in this case would be wrong because of how good they've been here over the last 4, 5, 6 games of the 2021 season and the hope that this group will be intact heading into 2022 as well. So I don't think if he wants to, he doesn't have to use all those picks that he'll have at his disposal. So it'll be really interesting to see what he does with those going in to next spring. But like I said, either way, I don't think he can necessarily be wrong. So like I said, top of the show, in segment 2, we got some PLL awards to hand out. We'll go through the MVP, Coach of the Year, plus Rookie of the Year, and go position by position as well to give out our PLL awards. But you're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back. Segment 2 on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Segment 1, we talked about the Atlas going for multiple number 1s here this weekend in Albany, that number 1 overall seed in the PLL postseason, but also have a shot at the number 1 overall pick in next spring's college draft via the Cannons. But in segment 2, we're going to get into the PLL awards, and I'll go through, give you my thoughts on those, give you the guys that I think should be some finalists for those later on. I'll get some of your thoughts in the mix as well on the PLL awards. But to just kind of go through one by one through this list of awards, starting with the MVP, I've got Grant Ament there with an honorable mention of Jeff Teat for the league MVP. But when you look at a guy like Grant Ament, he leads the league in points and assists this year, and he actually has the fewest number of turnovers of the top 5 at attack in terms of overall points, which really just shows you how efficient he is in orchestrating that Archers offense. Really high point production, very little turnovers to go along with that. At attack, I've got Jeff Teat with an honorable mention of Grant Ament, Lyle Thompson, and Rob Pennell. So really for me here, I think that if you go with Ament as MVP, that leaves the door open for a guy like Jeff Teat to assume Attackman of the Year honors in the PLL. And he's played very well and actually has done so in less games than most of the rest of the league. If you remember, he was on the travel restriction list at the start of the year, so he missed the first, I believe it was 2 games for the Atlas, and yet he's still tied for the league lead in points while also shooting 43% on the year. At midfield, I've got Zach Currier with honorable mention of Brian Costabile. I mean, as much as I like Brian Costabile and as well as I think he's played this year, was also a all-star this year, and he leads all midfielders in points this year. Currier is just one of those guys that he's a do-it-all kind of guy. He can cause turnovers, get ground balls, he can pass, he can score, he can literally do it all. He can play defense. So it's really hard to vote against a guy who can do just about everything and more on a lacrosse field, even for as good as somebody like Costabile has been here in 2021. LSM, I've got Joel White. I think this would be a really nice way for him to end his career, as he announced his retirement at the end of this year earlier this week. Him and John Galloway will both retire at the end of this season, but he's also the top LSM in the league statistically with 13 caused turnovers and 35 ground balls, also tallying 4 points on the year. So obviously one of the bigger front runners at a position, I would say, outside of maybe attack with either Eamon or Jeff Teat at that position, but probably one of the bigger front runners at any position in terms of Joel White at LSM. At defenseman, I've got Liam Burns with an honorable mention of Graham Hossack or Cade Van Raphorst. I'd also throw in Michael Rexroad to that mix as well. But I think that Burns has really led the charge for the Water Dogs defense that's taken a complete 180 over the last handful of games defensively. But overall, he has 17 caused turnovers and 17 ground balls, so very consistent, very balanced player defensively. And if I'm not mistaken, he's also shown up in the weekly segment that the PLL does, the 10-man ride. That's what it's called. Sorry, I was having a brain fart there. The 10-man ride, the segment that they do every week that they send out. He's been a regular, I think, on that as far as the different things that they've done there. So obviously one of the more notable or highlighted defensemen in the league. But again, like I said, some honorable mentions to Graham Hossack, Cade Van Raphorst, and even I'd go as far as Michael Rexroad there. For goalie, I've got Adam Gittleman with an honorable mention of Blaze Reardon. Reardon, the 2-time goalie of the year in the PLL, but I want to go with Gittleman here. I obviously wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Blaze Reardon, but I'm going to go with Adam Gittleman for me personally. I've been very high on him this year, and while he hasn't played every minute of every game like many of the other goalies that you could throw in to this goalie of the year category, such as Blaze Reardon, the minutes that he has gotten, the minutes he has played, have been extremely impactful. He's made 61% of his saves, 10.1 scores against average. That's one of the best in the league. He's also got 21 ground balls and 3 points. Yes, he has 3 points on the year. He had a 2-point goal and an assist in one game. I believe it was back during the Baltimore weekend. So I don't really blame him for Chris Bates sitting him at times throughout the year to give a guy like Drew Adams some reps in the cage, because like I said before, the minutes he has played, the times that he has been in, have been very impactful for this Archers squad. At faceoff, I think this one's pretty obvious at this point. TD Ierlan, he's led the way at the stripe all season long, and I assume he'll finish there to end the season as well. So this, like I said, was kind of a no-brainer for the rookie and TD Ierlan as face-off specialist of the year. Short stick D mid, I've got Zach Goodrich with honorable mention of Danny Logan. I think you could also throw Ryan Tarafanko in that mix as well. For the rookie of the year, I think with all the love that guys like TD Ierlan and Jeff Teat will get throughout these award presentations, with all the love that those two are going to get, I'd actually like to go in another direction here and throw out names like Jake Carraway, Ryan Tarafanko, who I mentioned for a possibility as short stick D-mid of the year, but Carraway, Tarafanko, and Jackson Morrill, another one. In no particular order here, but those three I think could also really make a case for Rookie of the Year as well, if the league decides that they don't want to just load up on awards for guys like TD Ierlan and Jeff Teat. And then Coach of the Year, I think for me, this one is pretty obvious at this point, although I do think you could make a case for a few other guys, but for me, it's got to be Ben Rubio. I mean, the way he put this team together so aggressively in the offseason and made it better basically instantly outside of that week 1 game against the Archers. And even looking at the trades that he made, which we highlighted at the top of the show, trading away guys like Rabel, Pennell, Ryan Brown, and winning more games without them than he did with them, and also obtaining some really nice draft capital in the process to show for it, getting guys like Aiken, Danny Logan, guys like that really made an impact on this team this year. So he really took an Atlas team from worst to first in 1 year and has really also in the process set themselves up for success in the future as well, as I mentioned in 2022 and beyond. So Ben Rubio is my Coach of the Year. But in just a second, we'll get to the final segment here on a Thursday, heading into the final week of the PLL regular season in Albany. We'll get your thoughts on these PLL awards in the mix, as well as your thoughts heading into that final week in Albany. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Final segment of the show here on a Thursday as we make our way in to the final week of the regular season in the Premier Lacrosse League. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. I went on Twitter at Stevie Mack Media is my Twitter handle to get your thoughts on some of these PLL awards. Also your thoughts heading into this final weekend of the regular season. And I got a couple of things from some of you as far as these awards go. So I took those ideas that you guys had, some of the names that you threw out there, and I put them into one combined condensed list based on some consistent names that I was seeing between the two. So from Jackson Paul Gavin and Michael Grine on Twitter, these were their lists that I kind of meshed together. At MVP, they had Grant Ament, Jeff Teat, and Zach Currier. At Attack, Teat, Ament, and Rob Pennell. So between the MVP and Attack, I really don't have any complaints there. I definitely agree with those. I like the addition of Rob Pennell as far as that conversation for Attackman of the Year. I definitely think that he'll be a part of that conversation and be one of the finalists for Attackman of the Year. But obviously, like I said, Grant Ament, Jeff Teat for MVP, no arguments there. Zach Currier, I definitely think you could make a case for him there, as I mentioned, kind of that do-it-all midfielder. So yeah, I definitely think that there is a case to be made for Zach Currier as a possible MVP candidate. But in the midfield, they had Currier, Brian Costabile, and Tom Schreiber. Tom Schreiber making an appearance on the midfield list. I didn't have him as one of my few choices on my list in segment 2. But yeah, again, another solid couple choices here between Currier, who was my pick. Costabile was also my honorable mention. And then I don't think you can ever go wrong with having a guy like Tom Schreiber on your Midfielder of the Year award list. At LSM, they both pretty unanimously actually had Joel White there. So again, no argument there. That's the guy that I had. Defensemen, they have Graham Hossack and Liam Burns. Again, no arguments there. Those are two of the guys that I had as well. Two of the leaders of their defenses, two of the playmakers as well. Hossack, more of an anchor of that defense. And obviously, like I said, I highlighted in segment 2 the complete 180 turnaround that this Water Dogs defense has done the past several games, and that in large part due to the play of guys like Liam Burns on defense, but also Dylan Ward in the cage, and I've given him his credit as well. For face-off, they had TD Erlin. Obviously, like I said in segment 2, that one's pretty cut and dry at this point in the year. Goalie, they have Blaze Reardon. Reardon was my honorable mention behind Adam Gittleman, but again, like I said, would not be surprised if Blaze Reardon, three-peated at goalie of the year. Short stick D mid, they have Goodrich or Tarafanko. Again, I don't think you can go wrong with either of those. I'd also throw in Danny Logan to that mix as well, but again, don't think either one of those two would be a bad choice. Rookie of the year, they have Jeff Teat or TD Erlin. Again, like I said in segment 2, these guys are going to be in the running for several categories, whether it be face-off and rookie for a guy like TD Erlin, if it's MVP, attack, or rookie for a guy like Jeff Teat. These guys are going to take home some PLL awards here at the end of the year, and that's why I said in segment 2 I'd also throw in guys like Jackson Morrill, Tarafanko, even Jake Carraway possibly as another one for Rookie of the Year, just to throw out a few more options than probably two of the more obvious ones in Teat and TD Erlin. And then Coach of the Year, they had Rubior or Andy Copeland, and again, I don't think you can go wrong with either. I'm kind of partial towards Rubior, but again, I think that with what he's done with this Atlas team in just 1 year's time, having them go from worst to first the way that they've done it, and really the last 4, 5, 6 games looking like a true number one team these last several weeks, is why I have him as Coach of the Year. But again, don't think you can go wrong with a guy like Andy Copeland, and you can definitely make a case with the way that they've really turned their season around, a complete 180. You could definitely make a case for him as well. But to round out the show here on a Thursday as we make our way in to Albany for the final weekend of the regular season in the PLL, Michael Grind's comment for the weekend in general, he says it's impossible to predict any game with confidence. You could easily go 0-6 on predictions. Rambo returns, but tough matchups for the Whips against the Woods and Archers. Potential return of Sowers as the Water Dogs battle the Atlas for the top seed, and Chrome vs. Cannons will be exciting. So yeah, this is kind of everything that you would want to be watching for here this weekend in Albany. Is that, and I've said this from basically the very first weekend, is it's so hard to predict these games going into the weekend, because from a game to game, week by week basis, you just don't know what's going to happen in this league this year. And I don't think that this weekend will be any exception to that. And like he said, you could easily, I feel like this would be pretty hard to do, but he says you could easily go 0-6. Again, I think that'd be a little bit hard to do, but again, like I said, from a game-to-game basis, you never know what's going to happen, so obviously that's always kind of a possibility. But he says Rambo returns, but tough matchups for the Whipsnakes going against the Woods and the Archers. Yeah, I do think getting him back is very important, to say the least, for the Whipsnakes, given the struggles that their offense has had. But they also made that trade for Justin Gutterding, so it'll be interesting to see the role that he plays within that offense, especially if Matt Rambo comes back this weekend. He has officially been activated to the active roster, so I think it's whether or not he actually plays this weekend that's the question, but he at least will be there in Albany this weekend. But yeah, they do have two extremely tough games against two really good defenses, in particular in the Woods and the Archers, coming this weekend, and in my opinion, I think that they need to win at least one of those games. Which one it'll be, I could not tell you, because again, you just never know on a game-to-game basis what'll happen, so I'm not even going to try to guess which one of those games they will win, if if they do win at least one of those. But yeah, an extremely tough weekend, and I think extremely essential that they got Rambo back this weekend given the opponents that they have ahead of them. He says the potential return of Sowers. Yes, Sowers is listed as questionable for this weekend, although I believe a few weeks ago he was actually taken off the injury report a few weeks ago. But maybe something changed in that time. I'm not sure. But yes, would love to see a return of Michael Sowers to the field here this weekend, because I think he'd be a big addition for the Water Dogs heading into that game against the Atlas, because the winner, as I'm sure we all know by now, the winner of that game gets the #1 overall seed in the postseason and thus gets the first round bye. So getting him back in that game would be a big boost for that Water Dogs offense. And then he says Chrome against Cannons will be exciting. Yeah, because on the other end of the spectrum here, we're talking about the Water Dogs and the Atlas going for that #1 seed in the postseason. On the other end of that, the Chrome and the Cannons are playing just to get into the postseason and avoid missing out on the playoffs altogether. The winner finds themselves in. Whether they get in at #6, #7 is yet to be seen. And the loser obviously is on the outside looking in. So another great weekend in the PLL, I'm sure, coming up here in Albany to round it out and send us to the postseason. A lot still to be determined, as I said, with that #1 seed and the final spot in the playoffs still up for grabs here this weekend. But definitely looking forward to getting the PLL back, as we seem like we've been off for quite a while now, doesn't it? Between the All-Star break and then a bye week after that. And even just a few weeks ago, there was another bye week on top of that. So it seems like we've been really off with this PLL schedule as of late. So it'll be really fun to see that back in action this weekend as we make our way towards the postseason. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share as always on this post. Let me know what you guys think about the PLL awards this year and who some of your favorites are to take home the certain awards that are up for grabs. Also, let me know what you think heading into this weekend in PLL action as far as some of the games that we've got going on, whether it's the Water Dogs and Atlas, Cannons, Chrome, even some of those games, as I mentioned, the Whip Snakes will be going up against the Woods and the Archers this weekend. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.